Well, good morning, and welcome to the White House. The theme of Champions of Change really gets to the heart of something that at FEMA, as we came in the administration, we wanted to change some of the conversation. You still hear this, but you won't hear, hopefully, many people in FEMA saying this, that in a disaster, there's all these victims. And we said, the first thing you got to recognize is that they're not victims, they're survivors. We bury and mourn our losses. But communities that are impacted by disasters, people just aren't sitting there waiting for somebody to show up and take care of them. And we also threw out terms like first responders, as is, unless you were a professionally trained expert, the implication being if you weren't a professionally trained expert, stay out of the way, that was the first responder. And I've been to too many disasters where the first responder was actually a neighbor checking on a neighbor. And so what we found in government was we tend to really get good at what we call government-centric problem solving. And as long as the events fall within the parameters of government, we're very successful. And it gives the illusion that we are well adapted at managing crisis until the disaster is bigger than that, until the crisis is bigger than that. And time again, we've seen in large-scale events that when we only look at what government's going to do, or we build all our solutions around government, the communities suffer. Because we were approaching disasters from the standpoint of what government was going to do, what government could do, and also this notion that the public as a general was a liability. Now, we would never say that publicly. But if you looked at all of our planning, doctrine, and everything, we tend to look at the public as somebody that needed to be taken care of. That all these things had to be brought in to take care of you, and we needed to tell you where you were going to go. We were going to have to tell you what you were going to do. And we took what I call a very parental approach that, again, oftentimes gave the illusion of control, gave the illusion of management. But the reality was people weren't waiting. And oftentimes we became the impediment for response at the local level. You may have heard this from time to time. Local officials and communicating, one of the big concerns was, we don't want to panic the public. And I'm like, the only time I've ever seen the public panic is when they find out we don't give them the information they need. And then they start to wonder what's going on as to what we're not telling them. And we tell people, stand back, stay away, let the professionals do it. Yet in Boston last week, if we had taken that approach, more people would have lost their lives. Because in many cases, it was the bystanders who were taking off T-shirts and applying emergency tourniquets that kept people from bleeding to death until they could be rescued. And so the lesson we wanted to change was the public is not a liability. They're a resource. But we want to take it one part further. Not only are they a resource, they're part of the team. And that to go into these large-scale disasters and say, we're going to bring everything from the outside, negates the fact that many of the people that are right there who probably the very moment before that event occurred had never really thought about disasters, but saw immediate needs and dealt with them. And we had to change our approach. Is we've got to quit looking at that as something we have to manage or figure out, well, you're not part of government or you're going to do more harm than good. And go, actually, you're doing more good and you're doing it faster. And why are we fighting it? Why are we not building the team concept around the public as one of our key resources, not a liability? And so we began this process of looking at our programs, looking at how we refer to people. We started changing. And sometimes it's just simple terminology change. Quit referring to the public as victims and call them survivors. Quit looking at the public as a liability and look at it as a resource. Recognize that the first response is a neighbor. And we have to change our preparedness message. And it isn't where we want it to be because too often times we tell you, get a plan, have a kit, know what to do. We need to follow up on what many of you did, which was act. Once you and your family are safe, check on your neighbors. If you have skill sets and tools that weren't part of that before and you can solve a problem or you see a problem, why are you having to wait for permission from somebody? And people are afraid, well, this is going to cause all kind of chaos. And I said, well, disasters by their very nature are chaotic. But if we look and trust each other and recognize the public as a resource, not something that's a liability, not something that is government, we're going to say, well, we won't be able to control it. We won't be able to manage it. And going, that's not how you talk about team members. Do you talk about other parts of your team? Well, we can't manage them, we can't control them. And so we needed to give the public a seat at the table, both in our plans, but also in our understanding that the resources of the community needs to be part of the team. And that was the evolution of what became whole of community. It was moving past government-centric problem solving and recognizing that government by itself would not have all the answers. That the private sector, who provides goods and services every day, if they're not part of that plan, we can't replicate what they do better than us every day, and they need to be part of this team. We recognized that there were many traditional NGOs, non-government organizations, some which had very predominant and very visible disaster response roles, some that disasters were not part of their day-to-day core mission, but stepped in because of capabilities and resources in that community that they could bring to bear. And then the public. When people stand up and go, I see a need. I have backgrounds or skills. Some of you are our veterans who have served this country. And then recognize in disasters, those skill sets still provide value to supporting your community. Some of you were business people who, because you knew your community and you knew resources, could put them together and address the gaps that occur. You know, we know our programs don't make people whole. It was never the design of FEMA itself to make people whole. And that's why the partnership with the public and the partnership with community organizations is so key, because when you're addressing these needs in the event of a disaster, it has to be all of us doing what we can. And you exemplified that. Many of you, without anybody giving you permission, without ever giving you a charter, without ever questioning, did you have incident command system training or some other certification? You took it upon yourself to help your neighbors. You took it upon yourself to take your skill sets and apply them to the problem. And so these are the kind of things that this exemplifies. And this is one of the things that the President recognized in a cabinet meeting as the incoming cabinet members were joining the administration the first time. And it's something he continues to echo. You know, we have to look to all of us to solve problems. We have to bring all of our best. And so when Sandy hit, it was under his leadership that we brought all of the federal family together. But even with all of that, without what you did, we would not be as far along as we are in Sandy. And again, this is not designed to be one time. We want to continue to apply the lessons to other communities, other examples, other groups that can do what you did. In some cases, what you're doing is a prototype that other groups will emulate. In some cases, your new systems and capabilities we brought on, combining people that are willing to sign up and provide community service, and then applying that to disaster survivors, such as our FEMA Corps under the AmeriCorps program. But this is always about the outcome, meeting the needs of the survivors, what we call being survivor-centric. It's about a team that is not just government. It's not just traditional organizations. It's about what all of us can do as a community when disaster strikes. And it's recognizing that we cannot fall into the trap of a government-centric approach to having all the answers. We need the entire community, because disasters do not hit political subdivisions. You know, we always refer to it from cities and counties and parishes and states, but disasters hit neighborhoods, they hit families, and our response has to be based upon those structures. And that's what you represent. The neighbor helping neighbor, the people giving their time in community service, business people that are bringing their resources together, and all the things that build the response we saw from Sandy. So this is our chance to recognize what you've done, and hopefully not only recognize you here, but inspire others to do what you did before the next disaster. Thank you very much.
I really have two very simple words I want to start with, which are thank you. The work that you all have done is simply remarkable. I have one of the hardest things that I have ever done, certainly one of the hardest things that I've experienced in this work, is traveling to places, whether it's New Orleans and the Gulf Coast, whether it's Minot, North Dakota, after the worst floods that they've ever experienced, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or Joplin after a tornado, to meet a family that has experienced something like Sandy, is to see a person, human beings that are at their most difficult moment. When they've lost their homes, maybe a family member, when their entire community in some cases is gone. And the work that you all are doing to help those families recover is simply remarkable. You are true champions of change, and my main message to you today, on behalf of the President, on behalf of the entire country, is thank you. I also have the great honor and responsibility of leading the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force. President Obama asked me to lead that, in part because HUD is one of the most significant agencies in the federal government in terms of long-term recovery. Through our Community Development Block Grant and other programs, we've invested tens of billions of dollars to help communities recover. And so I've spent some real time on these issues, but what the President also knew after Sandy was that this had to be an entire federal government response. Whether it's Governor Cuomo or Governor Christie or an individual citizen needed help, they needed to know that every one of the members of the cabinet, every one of us was focused not just in the days or weeks after the storm, but for the months and years that it is going to take to fully recover. And so it wasn't just the more than 15,000 federal personnel we had on the ground within the week after the storm. It's the hundreds of folks that are going to be there for years to come on the ground, making sure that your communities recover. And the work that we're doing there is absolutely critical. Now, one of the things the President asked me to make sure that we got to him by August 2nd, a comprehensive strategy for how we're going to rebuild the region, and we're working on that. But one of the things that we're going to do is also provide to him recommendations about what we can do better going forward. What are the lessons that we've learned? And these discussions that are happening on these panels, in the hallway conversations you're going to have today, we want to capture all those lessons to figure out how to do this better. And how do I know this is important? Because when I started on the job, Janet Napolitano and I, one of the first trips we made was to New Orleans 3.5 years after Katrina. Recovery wasn't far enough along. And one of the things that we learned was that we had organizations of volunteers, local nonprofits, like so many of the organizations that we're hearing from that are champions today, that not just were trying to help recovery, but the federal government was actually getting in the way of volunteers and others being able to help. I'll give you one example. I went down with my 2 young sons to help rebuild a home. I felt it was important for them to know personally this experience. We met an elderly couple, she suffering from Alzheimer's in a wheelchair, the husband a military veteran. They had completely rebuilt their home with help from the federal government. But when they'd moved in, they started to see something growing on the drywall. We figured out that they'd used contaminated drywall in rebuilding their home. And so they had to entirely gut their home, pull out all of that work that had been done. And so here, my sons and I met this couple. And they were living in a home with no walls, no plumbing, literally like a campsite in their own homes. And my team had to tell them, I'm sorry, we can't do anything about it. You've already gotten your federal benefits. There's a law called duplication of benefits that doesn't allow us to help. Well, I went back to my team and said, we're going to figure out how to help. We've got to be able to do something. We worked with our partners across, and what we figured out is that we could work with volunteer organizations to help them rebuild their home. That's just one example of the way we've got to make sure, and the president has said, Sean, you've got to figure out, how do we get out of the way? How do we make sure that this enormous outpouring that is represented here today, that we are not just standing in the way, that we're enabling it. We're doing everything we can to provide support and assistance to the kind of work that you all are doing. Whether it's bringing solar power to those struggling in the Rockaways, whether you're restoring the shore, whether you pumped water and removed mold from homes, you delivered food to the hungry, all of the remarkable work that we're seeing here today. We need to be a true partner to all of you, not just in Sandy, but any time we have a family suffering across the country. That's a fundamental part of what the president said, Sean, you need to get done with all your colleagues in the government. And it's why, one of the reasons why we wanted to celebrate you all today is for you to help us think about how do we do this right every time we have a family suffering. Let me just say one more thing. I started by thanking you, and really I did that as the HUD Secretary, as chair of the task force. But I also want to thank you from a much more personal perspective. I was born and raised in New York City. 2 weeks after the storm, I went back to help a friend bury his daughter, who was killed by a falling tree in Prospect Park. I have friends who are still struggling to get back in their homes, back into their businesses in the neighborhood in Brooklyn where I lived for 15 years. This is personal to me, and I will tell you, this is something that this president, this entire administration, we are not going to leave. We are not going to stop until we can make sure that every family, every community is recovered. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. We're going to be too slow because you can never be fast enough in these situations. But we are going to keep coming and keep doing. And the way we're going to do it is because we're going to watch all of you. You are the inspiration. You are our champions of change to remind us that we have never done enough, that we always have to keep coming back and doing more. And having seen, I was in the Rockaways just a couple days after the storm, having seen the remarkable work that you all have done, I end where I began, which is to say thank you. Thank you on behalf of me personally as a New Yorker. Thank you on behalf of President Obama. Most importantly, thank you on behalf of every family whose name you'll ever know, whose face you'll never recognize, but who, because of the work that you've done as champions of change, has been able to put their lives back together after a disaster that hopefully they will never have to experience again. So thank you. Thank you for your remarkable work.